All right, Ian, pleasure having you on, sir. How did I find you? Well, I was looking for a video on how to run a Bitcoin node. And then I was trying to do a lot of research. There wasn't a lot of, videos and information available, but I found yours. And I like how you explain things in simplistic ways, very professional with how you, make your videos. So that's when I stumbled across your channel and I watched dozens and dozens of your videos. So I want to bring you on, get to know you better and have my audience, check you out as well.
Yeah, no, thrilled to be here. Thanks for reaching out. And yeah, it's there's enough content out there, I think, on trading signals and price movements, and so I've tried to focus on the tools that enable people to be more financially self-sovereign with Bitcoin. So it's a pleasure and looking forward to our conversation today.
All right. So Ian, why don't you start with a brief introduction about yourself and how you got started in Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I mean, I was first exposed to Bitcoin back in 2013. I was studying in university at the time, and I had a classmate coming in, sweating every day. I'm like, what's going on? And he was day trading Bitcoin, and so that was unfortunate because my first exposure to it was, oh, it's like this gambling internet thing, and which is unfortunate because I've always been a someone who values free market ideals and that sort of thing. And so fast forward to the 2017 cycle, that was really when I first got into Bitcoin. And at the time, I had a diversified, crypto portfolio and this and that, and didn't really know heads from tails in terms of why Bitcoin was unique and special. And so following that, really went down the rabbit hole, call it 2018-ish, and realized, okay, there's actually really unique merits and properties to Bitcoin specifically. Which is why I wanted to focus on that. Professionally, I worked as a consultant for a number of years. We had a software analytics platform that helped big companies do test and learn. So A/B experimentation across all sorts of different business initiatives. Hey, we're considering changing prices or introducing new merchandise or whatever. And we were acquired, interestingly enough, by MasterCard, who's made a big push into data and analytics to complement their core payments business. And so for better or worse, that gave me a glimpse into the traditional world of payments. But it also led us to look at all sorts of different loyalty programs. And so we're, for their banking partners, retail partners, airline partners. And I think the sort of not so comfortable truth that we generally found, and this is replicated, elsewhere, is that when it comes to loyalty, companies think they're getting, X when in reality they're getting something more like Y. And when you peel the onion back and understand, well, why is that happening? Why are some loyalty programs delivering, really great returns and others are not? Typically comes down to perception of value. So consumers sort of, even if they haven't done the math, they kind of know and see how these different units of loyalty value, your points, your miles, et cetera, lose value over time. And also flexibility, right? I have all these little silos of points and I can't do much with them and they don't talk to each other. They each are built on these archaic systems that are closed. And so you can sort of see where Bitcoin fixes this comes in. And so I'm also the co-founder of a Bitcoin startup called Jolts. And so we got started with Bitcoin rewards as a service. We've since kind of expanded beyond that, but that was also an interesting kind of intersection, at least professionally for me, with Bitcoin, in addition to the channel that I do.
Great. Yeah, we'll definitely get a little bit more about Jolts later on. So what does Bitcoin mean to you in a few words, since everyone might have a different meaning?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. People talk about Bitcoin as this prism, as this very multifaceted thing. You can come at it in all sorts of different angles. I think for me, it really, it's twofold. There's a great book that I would recommend people read. It's called The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. And it's essentially this study that, like, hey, despite what seems like a lot of bad things happening in the world, and like that's true, right? The kind of clown world meme is absolutely true. And yet, over the longer arc of history, like, we are unquestionably better off today than we were, 100 years ago, whatever. And he traces it, and people are like, well, technology, human language, they're like, but he essentially attributes, really the core driver of prosperity as exchange. Our ability as humans to freely exchange ideas and goods and services is the sort of foundational driver of prosperity. And so that then leads to, well, how can we facilitate that in as best the way as possible? Well, that leads you down the rabbit hole of, well, money is this emergent tool. And so Bitcoin for me is this critical non-state money that is best suited to facilitate global exchange, which is, the bedrock of prosperity. So I could have said like separate money from state, but it's sort of like to what end? And I think the end is enabling this credibly neutral, censorship resistant money for the whole world to use.
Nice. Very well said. So when I watched dozens of your videos, you have a great teaching skill. Did you develop this yourself or did it come naturally?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think somewhat naturally. I mean, I did as a college sophomore, I think I did a little SAT, one of the standardized test score prep classes, and so it was premised on like, here's the curriculum, but you go out and kind of build a business, and then you teach others, high school students to do the SAT, and so that gave me, I think, an appreciation that, hey, this is something I enjoy doing. It's something that I seem to be, at least decent at. And even in my consulting days, like talking to clients and helping them understand complex data and complex analytics and really trying to make that accessible to someone who may not have that same background. So I suppose in my experiences, I've, picked up those skills along the way, but I appreciate the kind words as well.
Okay, so you are the co-founder of Jolts, which is a Bitcoin reward startup. Can you go over the idea that led to the creation of this company, and was it intended to compete with credit card companies' rewards program?
Yeah. I mean, we alluded a little bit to the sort of genesis for it. It really was born out of this idea that the traditional world of loyalty has these huge, problems. I was on Natalie Brunell's podcast not too long ago talking about the rate at which these different units of loyalty value lose value over time, lose purchasing power over time. Our sort of back of the envelope estimation is that consumers are probably losing like $40 billion globally every year in purchasing power from depreciating points, miles, et cetera. So it's like, that's a humongous, challenge that is in addition to the general inflation that, consumers are seeing already. And so naturally, Bitcoin kind of emerges as, okay, this Bitcoin volatility can obviously cut both ways. However, over longer periods of time, you could go to Bitcoin price 21 or whatever.com to see, the price of all sorts of stuff in Bitcoin terms, and they all go, they're going down over time. And so really it started as a direct response to some of the pitfalls in traditional loyalty. And with that said, not surprisingly, most of our customers currently are Bitcoin companies, for whom this is much more of a no-brainer. It's like, oh, of course. So we have customers using us for rewarding purchases, referrals. It could be signing up for a newsletter. We've built an app that can be integrated into all sorts of different things. And so really any action on, any digital action can serve as a trigger for these rewards. And then we've also started to do some really interesting things with Taproot Assets. So Taproot Assets is a protocol developed by Lightning Labs, in which you can now, create different assets, yes, on Bitcoin, but also the Lightning Network. Some listening and watching to this way say, oh, I've heard this before. We don't want, tokens on Bitcoin or whatever. However, what we found in our work in talking now more and more with everyday, more mainstream businesses, right, that have nothing to do with Bitcoin, we realize that a lot of them are not yet ready to make that full leap, to Bitcoin. And so how can you put in more interim stepping stones was kind of the idea. And so you can do that by, creating, for example, a branded loyalty asset. So this could be, I'm a business and I have my own, fungible Taproot asset that is branded that looks a lot more familiar and accessible to the customer. It looks like a normal kind of loyalty program, but you can also, back that with Bitcoin, so it actually holds its value. So you can kind of start to make this a lot more accessible with what we're doing with Taproot Assets. And we've also since realized that there's a lot of other types of companies that have nothing to do with rewards and incentives that have an interest in Taproot Assets, things like stablecoins, which again, I have no need for stablecoins. Maybe you have no need for stablecoins, but there are a lot of people around the world who do, and for whom that is the stepping stone to get them onto the life raft that is Bitcoin. So I think we're going to see a lot more, with that protocol. And so we've built a lot of the early tech that's going to allow not just us to deliver some of these interesting use cases for rewards and incentives, but also other entities and companies for other types of use cases.
Okay, so if I were to swipe my credit card, do I get like Bitcoin rewards, or I have to buy something from like the Jolts program? So can you explain that?
Yeah, good question. So we're as of now, we're not sort of kind of going toe to toe with some of the card. There's other propositions out there. There's like Fold. Some of your audience will know about Fold, where it's like a little debit card, and you swipe and you get some Bitcoin back. But that's what they're essentially doing there, is they're sharing the debit interchange revenue. So all the little kind of fee swipes that they and the issuing bank earn, they're kind of giving you a tiny portion of that in Bitcoin, and that's great. And we certainly can enable that type of model. We would be partnering though with some sort of a fintech, and we've had some of those conversations, but they're still fairly early. So in our case, it would more be the case where someone could go to one of our partners, they buy something, they get the rewards back. So we're more of a B2B type of company. We're not necessarily going out and getting a bunch of consumers to come and kind of use the app, but that's how that would work.
Nice. I see you have a new sponsor, which is Bitcoin Trading Cards. Can you go over their product and how it can be used to get non-Bitcoiners on board? And is there a Satoshi Nakamoto card?
Yeah, great questions. I know. It's so Bitcoin Trading Cards is interesting. They're one of our customers at Jolts as well. So you can go on their website and get some Bitcoin back. But I met Aladdin, who's the founder of the project, back in Pacific Bitcoin Conference, the very first one in 2022. And at the time I was like, oh, this is like a quirky little. It's like kind of cool. You have these like physical, something physical that's sort of nice. I had collected Pokemon cards as a kid, and so the trading cards market is absolutely enormous in size, and so I was like, okay, that's interesting. But as I kind of learned more about it, as I saw some of how he was pulling all these amazing Bitcoin artists from all around the world who are contributing to like the actual art that goes on this card, as I started to see like the actual content on the card, it wasn't just like, oh, here's like a Lynn Alden card, or here's an Adam Back card, which are like cool, but wow, here's a card that goes into some of the details around economics and freedom and sovereignty. And so in addition to being pretty cool collectibles that I think are going to be interesting to really anyone who has done anything with trading cards, there's actually like a very real educational component to them. There is a Satoshi Nakamoto card. I forget how kind of rare it is on the rarity scale, but it was just one of these projects that I stumbled across. We got to know Aladdin and the team really well. They became a customer of Jolts, and they've put out now a couple different series. And the reason I find them so fascinating is you want to find what I'm really interested in is how can we kind of cross this chasm of, okay, we have our little group of cyber hornets, and we're in our sort of echo chamber with each other on Twitter and whatever. It's like, that's all great and interesting and fine. What are some of the different ways in which we can cross that chasm? Rewards is one way. Something like trading cards is, yet another. And so I would love to see more and more projects like that have this linkage to something fundamentally outside of Bitcoin, but that can kind of Trojan horse, some of the Bitcoin values into it. So it's a great project if folks want to check it out.
Can you explain the saying, fix the money, fix the world, for those hearing it for the first time?
Yeah, wow, man, it goes deep, and this isn't the idea is that money is so central to everything. Right? In many ways, going back to what I was just asserting earlier via Matt Ridley, like exchange is the core driver of prosperity and how we advance as a civilization, how we raise living standards, etc. And so in our modern, economy, and it has been this way for quite some time, like one half of every transaction is money. And so if one half of every transaction is corrupted, is broken, is something that you can't rely on, that you can't, as an entrepreneur, do economic calculations with, right? Like, how am I supposed to make business decisions today when I don't know how something as fundamental as money is going to change in the future, even 6 months from now or whatever? So a broken money system has all these cascading effects, right? You as an individual saver, you get screwed, right? Because your savings that you have traded your time to earn, maybe you earn whatever wage, or you're a business owner, whatever, however you're earning your income, you're trading your time, which really is our most scarce asset. And you're trading it for units of money that are getting debased over time. So they are literally stealing your time. So you, the saver, are getting wrecked. Entrepreneurs are getting wrecked, or individuals that need to make some sort of long-term economic forecast. You have to now be like, reading the tea leaves of Jerome Powell and all these central bankers to make any heads or tails business decision. Like, this is simply not the case. You have individuals in all sorts of professions that are now feeling obligated to like learn how to invest in financial markets just to keep up with inflation, right? Because if you're not investing in assets, you're not keeping up with inflation. So it has all these perverse effects. It tends to further income inequality, right? It further concentrates. So, and guess what? That leads to social unrest, which leads to conflict, which leads to divisiveness. So fix the money, fix the world is simply an attempt to articulate all these sort of cascading effects that stem back to money. There's the fiat standard from Saifedean that goes into kind of, food and health and like all these other areas that you wouldn't first think of as being integrally connected to the money system. And yet, in many ways they are. So by fixing the money, I think we should obviously be thoughtful. Like, it's not literally going to fix the world overnight. But if there's like one thing and one thing only we could fix, like what's the domino that we could flick first that could, boom, 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 and hit ever bigger dominoes? Like, what's the most leverage we could possibly have? Money is that thing.
So you always want to build things on a strong foundation, not like sand, right?
100%. 100%. And that's a good argument for Bitcoin versus, even other crypto ecosystems, right? Bitcoin really has proven itself as a computing network, as a decentralized system, in all those various ways.
You mentioned having a jurisdictional contingency titled "Adopt these Bitcoin practices now before it's too late." Do you refer to having residency plan Bs in place in case of Bitcoin high taxes or confiscation?
I think it's something that everyone should at least think about. And it's going to obviously depend on individual circumstances. It's going to depend on where individuals are located, what their perceived sort of, risks are. But we've seen too much, right? We've seen too many, signs. And I think no matter how you cut it, even with some of the recent maybe softening, you've seen, okay, like the Ethereum ETFs might get approved now. And so that means a broader, friendlier stance from the US at least on, but like you look at the longer term arc, it is wildly concerning. I mean, we saw the Canadian trucker convoy back with, the COVID stuff. We've seen just some really alarming developments that I think even the most pessimistic among us would not have necessarily predicted. And so I think it definitely behooves individuals to at least think about it, like at least think about, well, what would I do if, you know, like where is the line? Like where do I as an individual and as a family draw the line? It has to be somewhere, and it's going to be different places for different people, but that is at least my kind of suggestion on that point.
Yeah, like Jeff Booth says, like it just has to get worse, right, to keep the system going. So they'll continue to clamp down on your individual rights, you know, to keep you, you know, in the country and stuff like that.
100%. No, I think that's right. You know, capital flight is always a humongous risk to losing control of a system, and that system is in a precarious position as we see. The debt is, you know, at least in the US and really most of the West, is completely, totally, like unquestionably unmanageable. And so they have to. That's why you've seen all the privacy crackdown, you know, with Samurai Wallet and all of this. They need to be able to track and keep as much of this in a kind of regulated, surveilled system. That's part of why the ETF is something that, you know, I do think regulators embrace. So yeah, I think Jeff's obviously, you know, obviously got it right. It has to get worse before it gets better.
Okay, so this could take a whole podcast itself, but you did a video titled "The Nature of Time and Bitcoin." Can you briefly elaborate on the similarities between the two?
Yeah. So that video, I was taking a lot of inspiration from Gigi's article titled "Bitcoin is Time," I believe. So your audience, if you haven't read that, you absolutely should. But the idea is a fewfold. One, going back to something I was mentioning earlier, right? Like you're trading your time, and you know, I'm sure longevity research will continue to flourish. But as of, you know, and who knows if there's an afterlife or not, but like as of now, we get a finite amount of time and that's it. And like that really, if you think about it, is your most scarce asset. And so if ultimately what we're doing at the end of the day is trading our time with each other, you want a monetary tool that maps perfectly to that. And that is why absolute scarcity is so critically important. And so Bitcoin maps to the absolute scarcity of time. That's one important piece. The other is just the mechanism of like how Bitcoin works and sort of what it is as this distributed ledger, or as Gigi argues in that article, it's a distributed time stamping server. And if you look at the white paper, even you'll see that term like many times. You know, almost more so than kind of any other phrase. And so Satoshi was really thinking about this idea of time. Like, how do we as individuals in a distributed fashion reach consensus about the correct ordering of these transactions and the correct state of this ledger? You know, like the Byzantine generals problem, like all of that is so super difficult to solve for. And in that article, you know, Gigi makes the argument that proof of work, one of the most perhaps important arguments around proof of work versus other consensus mechanisms that is often very overlooked, is proof of work by definition requires time. Like work literally requires time to pass. You're applying, you know, energy over some kind of span of time. And the reason that's important is so that all the nodes that are participating can easily come to an agreement about what the correct version of the truth is. Because if you don't have that, then, you know, you could have problems like we've seen in you know, blockchain ecosystems like Solana, which admittedly have, you know, these kind of favorable traits around speed of you know, transactions, etc. But we've seen multiple instances where essentially the clock of Solana gets off, and so they have to kind of like reset the system. So that's obviously, you know, not a very decentralized system. You know, I'm not kind of throwing shade at Solana, but like it's a notable kind of example. So the parallels between Bitcoin and time are manifold, and I would not be doing it justice. So people should go and read Gigi's article, Bitcoin is Time, for sure.
Great. Okay, so let's get into the more technical questions about Bitcoin. So what are UTXOs? This was a foreign concept for me for a long time because mainstream hardware wallets and softwares do not explicitly state it anywhere. Will the bar
Yeah.
continue to get raised in the future for the smallest amount to keep as a UTXO?
Yeah, great questions. So UTXOs, short for unspent transaction outputs, is really like the fundamental unit of the Bitcoin ledger, if you will. Like one way, at least, to visualize, the Bitcoin blockchain is like a gigantic Excel sheet where each of the rows is an unspent transaction output. And so maybe one way to also understand that is go all the way back to the Genesis block, the very first block of the Bitcoin blockchain, mined into existence, by Satoshi. And that really was the first thing that starts all other things. And so now as Satoshi starts to send some of those coins from the very first block, to someone else, and that individual sends to someone else, basically every time one of those transactions is happening, there are inputs and outputs to that transaction. So let's say I want to send you some Bitcoin. I would take from my wallet, whatever wallet I'm using, some number of UTXOs or unspent transaction outputs. And the reason for that cumbersome name, which I think a lot of people agree is like not a very understandable name, but think of them like they're almost like bills in your wallet, like physical bills. Right? You have these different bills of different sizes or different UTXOs of different sizes that you can pay to someone, and potentially receive change back. And so the change that you receive back is yet another UTXO, right? And, when we say unspent, it's basically, I have this amount of Bitcoin that could be spent if I'm able to prove ownership of the keys that were used to generate that UTXO into my possession in the first place. So UTXO, unspent transaction output, they become inputs into transactions, and then there are outputs coming out of those transactions. Will the bar, your second question gets to the fact that, hey, as on-chain fees rise over time, let's say I have a really, really tiny UTXO of, whatever, 10,000 sats or whatever it is. At some point in the future, it will cost me more than that to simply get my transaction picked up by miners to get packaged into the next block. And so that's what people are referring to when they talk about, like, there's the dust limit, like there's an actual dust limit that your transaction has to be bigger than, but there's also kind of a practical economic dust limit, which refers to a UTXO that is smaller than the amount of fees that would be required to send it. So it becomes this sort of like unsendable thing. Now, of course, you can always like add more Bitcoin and combine that small UTXO with another one and send it that way. But what people are essentially doing now today is they're doing that consolidation in a preemptive fashion so that they don't have to, pay as much later on to consolidate these UTXOs into something that they know is going to be spendable. As some rough heuristics for, well, what should my UTXO size be? I think ideally 500,000 sats, 1 million if you can, but that's, that would be kind of a decent rule of thumb. And there are some who have done some nice math on what should your UTXO size be under different scenarios of fee pressure going forward.
Yeah. It's also important to note that like Bitcoin doesn't really care about like the amount. It cares about like the data size, right? And you have more UTXO, that's more data, which is more cost, right?
Yes. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
That's go ahead.
No, yeah, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that is an important, concept, right? The idea that when people go onto something like mempool.space, which is a great tool through which you can get context on, well, what are the fees? Like, what is the going rate of getting a transaction picked up soon versus later? And you'll see this kind of universal way of measuring fees is sats per VB or virtual byte. ignore the virtual part, but it's basically what you're saying, which is depending on the size of your transaction, each block has a fixed, scarce block space. So there's only but so much data that can fit into each. And so you are essentially bidding to earn a place within that block when you're paying for on-chain fees. And so, like with more adoption, with more demand for block space, we've seen things like, ordinals, which again, many in the, very kind of combative issue in the community, but there's clearly people who have a demand for these new use cases. Every time you open a Lightning channel, even that requires an on-chain fee. So there's all these different things that require block space. And so as those different use cases grow, as general adoption grows, naturally we would expect fees to go up over time.
How has your experience been with using the Lightning Network? I personally have never used it.
Yeah, no, Lightning. So Lightning is interesting, right? I think it has gone through several phases. In the early days of Lightning, let's call it maybe 2018, 19, it was, oh, this is never going to work, right? It's just like, no, this is not a thing. Then you start to get to kind of 2020, 2021 even, you start to have these plug and play Bitcoin node implementations like Umbrel that have baked into it a Bitcoin Lightning node, makes it a little more accessible for people to use the Lightning Network in a non-custodial fashion. And then I think in those years, we sort of had like, oh, Lightning is going to be the absolute end-all, be-all scaling solution for Bitcoin. And now I think we've sort of come to a middle ground somewhere in between, where we've realized that in the last year, with a lot of this fee pressure that we've seen caused by things like ordinals, most recently the launch of runes with the halving, you've seen a lot of fee pressure, and you've seen the impact that fee pressure has on the Lightning Network, because again, it still fundamentally requires a on-chain transaction to either open a channel or close a channel. Maybe to go into that in a little bit more detail if folks are brand new to the Lightning Network. So Lightning Network is a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin. We might call it like the payments layer. It makes Bitcoin, essentially instant to send and really, really cheap. And so, that's of huge value. It's also really the only L2. There's tons of L2 concepts flying around in Bitcoin right now. And a lot of people are debating, well, what is an L2? Like, what does it mean? And Lightning, I think, holds a really special place as being one of the few, if only, things that enables a unilateral exit, meaning I can permissionlessly engage with this L2 and I can permissionlessly disengage or exit this L2. That's super important. Even sidechains like Liquid have this kind of federated model where you're pegging your Bitcoin out of it. But in essence, Lightning Network is a channel-based payments layer to Bitcoin, meaning that I could open a channel with you of size 500,000 sats, let's say. And so what that means is that we can now send that value back and forth as many times as we want, like for free, instantly. And let's say that, I have someone else that I want to send value to, but I don't have a channel open with that individual, but you do. I can route that payment through you. So it's a sea of these payment channels. And that's great. However, there's a big difference in using the Lightning Network non-custodially and using Bitcoin on-chain non-custodially. So Bitcoin on-chain, right, it's just your private keys, right? Like you have your seed phrase, you have your 12 words, your 24 words, like that's it. As long as you have that and no one else does, like you're using Bitcoin non-custodially. You don't really have to be running a Bitcoin node yourself, although that is good. It's a good addition. With Lightning, it's very different. You running a Lightning node is a requirement for using the Lightning in a non-custodial fashion. And so this adds a burden to the end user. You also, by virtue of this kind of channel-based system, you have what are called liquidity constraints. So let's, for example, say that I open a payment channel with you of 500,000 sats, keeping with our example. What that means is that I can send up to 500,000 sats of value out. However, I actually cannot receive any value in. And this is the inbound liquidity problem of Lightning. And if you think about it, like that's a tough UX problem. You're saying that I open a channel, and yet in actuality, to receive payments in, I actually need someone to open a channel with me. And so not surprisingly, there are tools that have cropped up. There's little peer-to-peer, marketplaces by which I can say, hey, I need some inbound liquidity so I can accept Lightning payments. Can someone open a channel for me? I'm, willing to pay for the service. And so you've had the emergence of things called LSPs, or Lightning Service Providers. So if you go and download on your phone a non-custodial Lightning wallet like Breeze, like Phoenix, there are others. Typically, how those are working is the first payment you receive, what's happening behind the scenes is that their LSP or their node is opening a channel with your little lightweight node that's running in your phone, which is pretty cool. And so that's a very long-winded way of saying Lightning is super, super powerful. I think it's going to be one of the critical scaling tools to Bitcoin. I think it's going to be a dominant kind of value settlement layer for connecting all these different kind of L2s that we're going to see emerge. However, I don't think it is the end-all, be-all solution that's going to save us all. So, for example, if we wanted to get all 8 billion people on Earth onto the Lightning Network in a non-custodial fashion, meaning they have their own Lightning channel, it would take years and years and years of on-chain transactions for that to happen, right? Because you have that fixed block space. So we'll see different things like channel factories. There's covenant proposals. There's a lot of innovation happening that's going to make that better and make that more scalable. But you should definitely try it. It's definitely an important part of Bitcoin's story and arc.
Okay, let's switch some gears here. So what are some general Bitcoin privacy tips? We can dive deeper on this topic in a few moments.
Yeah, so I would say general tips. Anytime you can acquire Bitcoin non-KYC, meaning where you're not giving away all your personally identifiable information, that's the best starting point of all, because even some of the later privacy techniques that we can talk about are never going to erase the past, right? Even collaborative transactions, CoinJoin, these different techniques that can add privacy to you on a go-forward basis. None of that is going to erase the past of you going on whatever centralized exchange and buying Bitcoin. And so there are tools out there like Bisq, B-I-S-Q. I've done a recent video on their kind of Bisq2 engine, which adds a lot more user-friendly kind of flow to that. But it's basically just a peer-to-peer piece of software that you can come on and buy Bitcoin from other users via a variety of different payment methods. And so systems like that are great. That would be like step one. If for whatever reason you can't do that, or like there are trade-offs when you're using a platform like Bisq. Typically, you're going to pay a premium for the Bitcoin above and beyond what you would pay on a centralized exchange. So, right, that's something to keep in mind. There's also typically going to be less there's certainly going to be less liquidity on a peer-to-peer tool like Bisq versus a centralized exchange. So if you're really trying to buy in size, there may or may not be enough liquidity to kind of go around or that meets your kind of requirements. So what I've seen a lot of people do is, hey, I might have like a non-KYC stack of Bitcoin, and then I have a KYC stack of Bitcoin, and I keep those, fundamentally separate. I don't intermingle those, and that can be a nice way to sort of do this. Another general best practice is avoid address reuse. If I have a particular receive address that I'm sending Bitcoin to, every single time, that's not great. Let's say I'm sending Bitcoin to that from one exchange, from another exchange. now chain surveillance firms that are looking at this can pretty easily deduce that, okay, like this is this one identity that is getting, all of this value sent to this one single address. What a lot of people don't realize is my single wallet, like I have, let's say I have one wallet, my wallet is capable of generating any number of new, fresh receive addresses. And it is not possible to take two of those addresses and say that they were from the same wallet, right? So that's the importance of avoiding address reuse. It just makes it a lot harder for people to track you and activity on the blockchain. Running a node is a good practice. It's a little more advanced, but there's all sorts of resources such as mine and others. Running a node importantly enables you to not use someone else's node to broadcast transactions to the network. And so what you're avoiding sharing there would be things like your balances. There's maybe some world in which a surveiller could connect your IP address to, your balance and maybe connect that somehow to your identity. So running your own node is a great addition to privacy as well. And then finally, we get into kind of more advanced techniques like CoinJoin or collaborative transactions, which, is probably a topic in and of itself, but that would be the kind of short list of things that people can be thinking about.
So how powerful do you think are these chain surveillance firms? Like, are they looking at like millions and millions of transactions like instantaneously? Like, how powerful are they?
Yeah. I mean, it's fair to assume that they are extremely powerful. They have extremely sophisticated, tools, people, the software that is being used to 24/7, look at the blockchain. It's also worth noting that all of what they're doing are assumptions and heuristics for the most part, except for the fact where, let's say, let's use some examples. Let's say I buy some Bitcoin on a centralized exchange and I'm sending it out I'm withdrawing that Bitcoin to an address that I've provided. There are an increasing number of cases in which that exchange is now asking you, the user, hey, where are you sending this to? Is this an address that you own? And so, they're like recording that. They're basically saying, hey, Ian is withdrawing, 1,000,000 sats to Bitcoin address, blah, 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 blah. And so now they know, right? Like they know that address is mine. But even in the case where I'm not expressly asked that, they could still pretty easily make that assumption. Like, sure, maybe I'm sending it to someone else, but I'm probably sending it to me. But then after that, beyond that, it's all assumptions, which is, I think, the part that a lot of privacy advocates are rightly very frustrated with. Like you've seen chain surveillance analysis from some of these companies used in like legal battles, which are not definitive, like they're not definitive evidence. It is a conjecture. It is an educated guess as to what is happening. And so I think it's a hugely dangerous tool that regulators are using inappropriately in many cases to try and kind of prosecute people. So I think we should not only reject these things on the basis of, hey, you and I have a right to financial privacy. It doesn't mean that we're doing anything illicit or whatever. But we should also reject it based on the efficacy, because they are simply heuristics and assumptions. They are not, bulletproof in any way, shape, or form.
Can you go over phases of self-custody and why it is imperative to take possession of your private keys?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing, like if, people are listening to this and they're saying, okay, maybe I'm a little bit newer to Bitcoin. Like if there is one singular goal to work towards, it is self-custody. Don't worry about running your own node. Don't worry about any of this other stuff. Don't worry about a multi-sig, like save all of that for later. But taking basic self-custody is a crucial first step. We've just seen too many examples of trust in centralized exchanges that have gone terribly wrong. Look at FTX, look at Celsius and, BlockFi, all these examples from just this past cycle alone Not to mention, the Mount Goxes and the many other kind of littered carcasses that we see in this arc of Bitcoin. And so holding your own private keys, I think, is not just like the best thing to do, but it really, if you're not doing that, you don't actually have Bitcoin. You have a Bitcoin IOU. You have a number on a screen that tells you how much Bitcoin you have, similar to your bank account, right? But we all know that the money's not actually there in the bank, and we've seen that same truth hold for Bitcoin. And so until you withdraw your Bitcoin to your own self-custody, you don't actually have Bitcoin. And so that would be like the most kind of important part. And getting started with that, you don't have to jump all the way to like a hardware wallet, right off the bat. You can download all sorts of software on your desktop, on your computer, even on your mobile phone. There's things like Blue Wallet that very simple, kind of easy to use. They'll allow you to create your own wallet. You'll have your 12 or 24 words, which is a human readable version of your private key, i.e. the thing that allows you to control your funds. And you can then generate a receive address and withdraw your Bitcoin from the exchange or wherever you have it to that wallet. Sparrow Wallet is an example of a desktop wallet, a little bit more advanced, but again, if you're using it just in a very basic way, I think it's great. And so like start there, right? Like don't wait to go and get the fanciest hardware wallet in the world to take self-custody. Like take self-custody now, and then you can level up to a hardware wallet, to a multi-sig, to more advanced setups over time.
Great advice. Are you working on other Bitcoin projects, or what are a few projects that excite you the most?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's Jolts is sort of my baby for now. As I mentioned earlier, we're doing a lot of cool things with Taproot Assets, which is going to, I think, transform in a big way what we see with Lightning. Bringing things like stablecoins to Lightning, which again can be a controversial topic in the community, but I see it as a really important stepping stone for people to make their way onto this life raft that is Bitcoin. There's other exciting things happening in the world of Lightning. I think we'll see additional kind of features like channel factories and that could be enabled by things like covenants. So covenants is a whole additional kind of body of discussion that we could go into, but folks can look that up as well. There's some exciting things with privacy too. Silent payments is a really interesting thing that some wallets are experimenting with. And then maybe a final category might be, well, there's a lot of categories. A third category might be other types of scaling solutions for Bitcoin beyond, just the Lightning Network. There are a whole flurry of supposed L2s that are coming out, which are not really Bitcoin L2s, although they market themselves as. But one thing that I do think is really interesting are what are called ZK rollups, and this is a good example, for folks on that are listening who are Bitcoin only. This is a good example of a technology that was pioneered elsewhere in Ethereum land that is logically now kind of slowly making its way to Bitcoin. And so a ZK rollup, is a really powerful way to scale Bitcoin in a way that's permissionless, in a way that's completely trustless, and just gives us yet another lever by which to do this, and also gives some great privacy traits. So that's exciting, but that's going to require a new opcode or a new operation code, i.e. at least a soft fork to Bitcoin, which are always contentious. So we're not going to see, anything there for a while, but those are all really exciting. And then maybe the final thing that I'm also really excited about is the kind of like pleb mining movement. So one of the really important things to be aware of is that mining pools have gotten fairly centralized, right? Only a handful of pools manage, majority of the hash rate. And people will rightly say, well, Ian, that's not that big a deal, because if I'm a individual miner and I'm contributing my hash rate to this pool, I can switch the pool that I'm pointing my hash to very quickly and easily. And that is true. However, there was some interesting analysis that came out quite recently looking at a collection of pools that all appear to be using the exact same, what's called a block template. And a block template is what a miner uses to select the transactions that will go into a block. And so the concern there is a fewfold. Like if all the miners are kind of using the same exact block template, and or if we have a lot of these regulated, miners, does that add risk to Bitcoin censorship resistant properties? I don't think we've seen any kind of credible threat to that just yet, but it is concerning. It is something to think about. And so what we ideally want to see is not a whole bunch of megalithic miners that are centralized, regulated, etc. You want to see lots of small operators, lots of small operations. And going back to the proof of work as a consensus method, that is yet another reason why proof of work is so great. Guess what's fairly evenly distributed around the world geographically? Energy, right? So it's not the case that any one country has like all the energy. There's hydro, there's solar, there's natural gas, there's all sorts of stuff. And so my hope is that we see you see like more open source ASIC models, like the actual machines that miners are using. We're seeing software like Stratum v2, which empowers and helps, with some of the decentralization, but there's still a lot there to be done. So I would say like mining decentralization, definitely another theme that I think is very important.
All right, Ian, we're coming up towards the end of the interview. Thank you very much for your time. Is any last topics you'd like to discuss, and where can people find more information about you or reach out to connect?
Yeah, definitely. You can find me on Twitter, or X, I guess we call it now. My handle there is Ian_Major. You can also find me, of course, on YouTube. If you just type my name, Ian Major, or All Things Bitcoin, my channel should come up. If there's folks out there who want maybe more handholding or one-on-one mentorship, I'm now working with quite a few clients one-on-one, going kind of deep on some of these topics. You can reach out to me at vita.io/Ian Major. And yeah, those are probably the main channels, but it was a great opportunity to get the chance to chat, and hopefully this was helpful for the audience.
Thank you very much, Ian.
Awesome, V. Cheers.